Well, good evening. My name is Andrew Proctor. I'm the Executive Director of Literary Arts, and welcome to The Nation Live, the 150th anniversary celebration of The Nation magazine. Yeah, let's give it up for The Nation. It's 150 years old. For those of you unfamiliar with literary arts, we're a 30-year-old nonprofit literary center based here in Portland with a statewide mission to engage readers, support writers, and inspire the next generation with great literature. Our programs include Portland Arts and Lectures, the largest literary lecture series in the nation, the Oregon Book Awards and Fellowships Program, which for 27 years has supported Oregon writers and independent publishers. It now also includes Wordstock, Portland's book festival, which will relaunch on November 7th at the Portland Art Museum. And it includes the Writers in Schools program, which reaches 3,600 high school students all across the city with residencies, readings, and concert hall events like this one tonight. And I'm delighted to welcome Franklin High School, Madison High School, and Seaside High School, who are here with us tonight. You guys around here somewhere? Yeah. It's a distinct honor to be chosen to host The Nation here in our home city. It is a magazine not only with a rich history of political engagement, but also a rich literary tradition. And I want to thank Ms. Vanden Heuvel for making this opportunity possible to us. Please give her a round of applause. Yeah. We are thankful to our sponsors for tonight's presentation. They include the University of Oregon and the School of Journalism and Communications George S. Turnbull Center in Portland, and the center's former director, Mike Fancher, and the current director, Regina Lawrence. If you could give them a huge round of applause for making this possible. And I want to thank some of the presenters tonight who spent the morning at the U of O at a journalism conference with students. We're so grateful when our presenters and speakers spend time in our community engaging with our students and others. All of their schedules are very, very busy, so we really appreciate that and are grateful for it. I'm also hugely thankful to Tin House Magazine, and particularly to Wynn McCormick. Wynn and Tin House have supported literary arts since 2009 through the Oregon Book Awards and Arts and Lectures. Tin House is an amazing magazine. You should buy it and subscribe to it, and we should thank Wynn for all his support culturally throughout the city. So please give him a round of applause. I also want to thank the Heathman Hotel and Felicia Ram for their generously hosting our writers very graciously for the last 20 years. I want to thank AHA, our creative communications agency partner, who is clearly here somewhere, who just threw me off. Oh, who especially thanks to Betsy Henning, their founder and CEO, who's a wonderful person and a supporter and is here somewhere, I think. And I want to thank the Oregonian for their media support. And also thanks to some folks at The Nation, particularly Peter Rothberg, the associate publisher of Special Projects, and Jessica Lynn Diamond, who made that first call and asked us if we would host it. And I know that give Jessica a huge round of applause. Thank you. I also want to welcome Commissioner Nick Fish, who is here in the audience tonight. He declared today officially in Portland Nation Day from here forth. So that's great, and I appreciate Commissioner Fish willing to come out to events. He's got a very busy schedule himself. This is the moment when I remind you to turn off your cell phones despite political debates and playoffs. It is really distracting to have a cell phone lit up beside you, so if you could just refrain from emailing, tweeting, or checking the score, that would be really great, and we'd appreciate it. A reminder, tonight is being recorded by OPB for broadcast through the Literary Arts Archive Project, which broadcasts every Wednesday at 9 p.m. And now it's a huge honor to introduce the editor and publisher of The Nation magazine. Katrina Vanden Heuvel's vision and dedication are largely responsible for The Nation's enduring success, openness to new ideas, and for this visit to Portland. She is the winner of more awards than I have time or could possibly enumerate here, but they include Planned Parenthood's Maggie Award and most recently a 4 Freedom Award from the Roosevelt Institute. But suffice to say that her career is one of the great careers in journalism in the United States. Please join me in welcoming the editor and publisher of The Nation magazine, Katrina Vanden Heuvel.
Thank you. Thank you, great city of Portland. It is extraordinary to see this packed house tonight on a night, as Andrew said, thank you, Andrew, of debates and playoffs. It's a testament to a city which believes in ideas, in vision. And it is going to be a great evening of celebration and inspiration. Some of the most extraordinary writers who have been part of the nation, writers who make me believe that we have at least another 150 years in us. I will be back, but before I wanted to introduce one of the great inimitable pillars of the nation, John Nichols, National Affairs correspondent. I would be here all night if I talked to you about how he's founded this organization, who he writes for. I'm simply going to quote our great late contributing editor, Gore Vidal, who once said of John, "Of all the giant slayers now afoot in the great American desert, John Nichols' sword is the sharpest. Meet the giant slayer, John Nichols."
Woo. I cannot see you, but I know you are beautiful. Because Portland, Oregon has given us a fantastic welcome, and you have said that despite all of the power, all the importance of baseball, and despite everything that's going on in the presidential race, you want to come out and have a birthday party with The Nation magazine. All right. That is so cool because we owe you. You became a state 7 years before the nation was founded. You got there a little ahead of us, and we've been jealous. So we haven't come out this way for 150 years. Now, I recognize there's a couple people in the audience who've been reading the magazine the whole time, and I really appreciate that. But we waited 150 years for a reason. We wanted to see how Oregon would do. You know? We wanted to see, would you come up with anything? And I just want to say, thank you very much for Wayne Morse. Thank you very much for Tom McCall and for Mark Hatfield and for Neil Goldschmidt and for Vera Katz and for all these people you sent out our way to show us what to do right. But thank you also for your incredible show of humanity and conscience in the last week or so. You had a horrible incident in this state, and it's one that we should all pause and recognize. Oregon suffered not long ago with the killings at Umpqua Community College. And a lot of people thought, how do we respond to that? What do we do? This state, and I've seen it every place in the last couple of days that I've been here, you have poured out humanity and caring and conscience, and you have spoken of a need to respond to gun violence in this country in a powerful and clear way. If we ever get out of this wilderness, I believe that Oregon's going to lead us. And I thank you so much for that humane and decent response to something deeply awful. I recognize that your congressman, Earl Blumenauer, did not propose a response to gun violence after the shootings. He proposed it in February with his Enough is Enough proposal, a comprehensive proposal to address gun violence in this country. And I recognize also that as we struggle in America today with the fundamental question of whether we will be a democracy, that your governor, Kate Brown, just signed universal voter registration in this state. Other places are going the wrong way. Oregon's leading us the right way. This is real stuff. So we don't come here just to tell you about us. We come here to celebrate what you're doing. And we will give you a little bit tonight. We have an incredible group of people who are going to join us. I want to emphasize to you, The Nation magazine has made a profit in 1/4 of its 150 years. Not a quarter of all 150 years, 1/4 of 1 year. The only way we have made it across 150 years is because people like you have supported us all the way. So we are not celebrating ourselves. We are celebrating you, and we have brought some of the greatest members of the nation family to be a part of this celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, Naomi Klein is with us tonight. Walter Mosely is with us tonight. We didn't have to bring her far, but Ursula K. Le Guin is with us tonight. And I'm so honored that the first person I can introduce tonight is the kind of person who doesn't always get that out front position. Editors make the magazine happen. And I always have people say to me, hey, what are we going to do about the young people, right? How are we going to get young people engaged? Our website has tremendous traffic among young people. And it has it because our editor of our website, Richard Kim has gone and made it a vibrant, powerful website. And he hasn't just edited. When there's a story to tell, he runs out and does it. When Occupy started in New York City, Richard Kim got up from his desk and he went right down to the middle of Occupy and reported the hell out of that story. Brothers and sisters, I am so honored, and we're going to do this tonight too. We're going to have a little video clip before we introduce each person. But I am so honored to introduce to you my friend, my comrade, Richard Kim.
Thank you. I'm going to read from an essay by Tony Kushner, one of the great playwrights in America. It's called Socialism of the Skin. Is there a relationship between homosexual liberation and socialism? That's an unfashionably utopian question, but I pose it because it is entirely conceivable that we will one day live miserably in a thoroughly ravaged world in which lesbians and gay men can marry and serve openly in the military, and that's it. Capitalism, after all, can absorb a lot. Poverty, war, alienation, environmental destruction, colonialism, unequal development, commodity fetishism, boom-bust cycles, private property, individualism, the fetishization of the body, the fetishization of violence, guns, drugs, child abuse, underfunded and bad education, itself a form of child abuse. These things are key to the successful functioning of the free market. Homophobia is not. The system could certainly accommodate demands for equal rights for homosexuals without danger to itself. But are officially sanctioned homosexual marriages and identifiably homosexual soldiers the ultimate aims of homosexual liberation? Clearly not. If by homosexual liberation we mean the liberation of homosexuals who, like most everyone else, are and will continue to be oppressed by the depredations of capital until some better way of living together can be arrived at. So then, are homosexual marriages and soldiery the ultimate, which is to say the only achievable aims of the gay rights movement, a politics not of vision, but of pragmatics? Such a politics of homosexuality is dispiriting. Like conservative thought in general, it offers very little in the way of hope and very little in the way of vision. What of all the other things gay and lesbians have to fear? What are the things gay children have to fear in common with all children? What of the planetary despoilment that kills us, or the financial necessity that drives some of us into unsafe, insecure, stupid, demeaning, and ill-paying jobs? Or the unemployment that impoverishes some of us, or the racism some of us face, or the rape some of us fear? What about AIDS? Is it enough to say, not our problem? Of course, gay and lesbian politics is a progressive politics. It depends on progress for the accomplishment of any of its goals. Is there any progressive politics that recognizes no connectedness, no border crossings, no solidarity, or possibility for mutual aid? Perhaps the far horizon of lesbian gay politics is a socialism of the skin. Our task is to confront the political problematics of desire and repression. Stonewall was a 60s thing, part of the utopian project of that time. Honoring the true desire of the skin and the connection between the skin and the heart and the mind and the soul is what homosexual liberation is about. Gay rights may be attainable on however broad or limited a basis, but liberation depends on a politics that goes beyond, not an anti-politics. Our unhappiness as scared queer children doesn't only isolate us, it also politicizes us. It inculcates in us a desire for connection that is all the stronger because we have experienced its absence. Our suffering teaches us solidarity, or it should. Tony Kushner wrote these words for the nation in 1994. 21 years later, on June 26, the Supreme Court issued a 5-4 ruling in Obergefell v. Hodges, legalizing same-sex marriage in every state in America. Jubilant celebrations rang out across the country. You've anticipated my next line. So 21 years later, what are we to make of Tony's essay? Here's one way of looking at it. On that day, June 26, 2015, 4 people, including 2 women and a toddler, were found dead in a home in Green Acres, Florida. It was the 164th mass shooting in the United States this year. On that same day, President Obama delivered the eulogy for Reverend Clemente Pinckney, who was shot and killed along with 8 other people in his church in Charleston, South Carolina earlier that month. Since June 26th, there have been 136 more mass shootings, including in nearby Roseburg, bringing the total to 300 this year so far, to 1,000 mass shootings in America since the Sandy Hook massacre that killed 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7. On June 26th, police shot and killed 28-year-old Joe Cisneros in San Antonio, Texas. He was among the 896 people shot and killed by police this year in the United States so far. More than half of those shot and killed have been people of color, and almost 25% of them have been African-American men. If June 26th was like any other day, then over 100 million Americans ended that day below or near the poverty line. 30 million Americans were out of work or underemployed. 1 in 9 people around the world went to bed hungry that day. So yes, one way to look at it is that Tony was right. The day the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage was a day filled with as much violence and fear and want as any other day. But that's not really the point of socialism of the skin. And that's how I misread the essay for so many years. But Tony wasn't trying to paint an unchanging dystopian landscape and then take comfort in the idea that he would, in some ways, always be right. He was doing the exact opposite, urging us towards what he called the unfashionably utopian. I can't stand here today and say that we are anywhere near that utopia, socialist or otherwise. I don't know if I will ever be able to say that, but here are a few things I do know. I know that as Tony was writing these words in 1994, a group of inconceivably brave and staggeringly young men and women were literally fighting for their lives. They call themselves ACT UP, and they use their bodies and their words and their art to disrupt the cruelty of business as usual. They stormed the NIH, the CDC, St. Patrick's Cathedral. They scattered the ashes of their loved ones on the White House lawn because that is where the blame ought to rest. They refused to be disposed of. They were beautiful. They taught themselves science and medicine and law and how to navigate the maze of federal bureaucracies. And I know that because of this, they accelerated the development of drugs that saved not just some of their own lives, but the lives of millions and millions of people around the world. And some of them, those still alive, are still fighting, because there are still millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa and other poor countries who will need access to HIV drugs to live. And they are fighting to stop the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because it would bestow upon giant US pharmaceutical companies patents and profits that would kill millions of more people around the world from diseases like AIDS that we know are entirely preventable and entirely treatable. I know that 2 days before the Supreme Court ruled in Obergefell, in what was supposed to be a closed-door photo op of just LGBT leaders at the White House, another brave young woman named Geneset Gutierrez heckled President Obama. An undocumented trans woman, Gutierrez was raising the plight of other LGBT undocumented immigrants in ICE detention centers. She was shouted down by her fellow activists and escorted out of the Oval Office. But later, her protest went public and it became viral. I know that so many of the leaders of the immigrants' rights movements are queer, and they are coming out again, not as lesbian or gay, but as undocumented, in an attempt to weaponize their own personal stories, to assert that immigrants, too, have the right to form a family. I know that the success of the LGBT movement wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for women's liberation, if it weren't for the anti-war movement, if it weren't for the civil rights movement. And I know that just because we have marriage equality doesn't mean we are done fighting. I know that none of us are as alone as we think we are. None of our communities are as estranged from each other as they seem. And I know that if your politics only makes you comfortable with your own misery, then you're doing your politics all wrong. So here's to solidarity. Here's to mutual aid and to border crossings. Here's to unexpected and unlikely connections. Here's to utopia in all its unfashionableness. And here's to being brave enough and young at heart enough to listen to those utopian longings. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Richard Kim. I'm so pleased that each day he makes thenation.com what it is, along with all of our writers. If you don't go there on a regular basis, you don't know that you could be enjoying that quality of rhetoric every day. Richard Kim is a fantastic player, and we have so many others tonight. I want to read you a quick comment here, a suggestion about our times. And that is that we live in a moment of true choice, a chance to transcend the paralyzing hierarchies of gender, race, class, nation, a chance to find a radical cure for the radical evil of our social system. Those are the words of Ursula K. Le Guin. I could call her one of the greatest writers of our time. I could talk about the many awards she has received and the great honors that she has been accorded in her lifetime. But the truth of the matter is that what she has done above all is to speak of that transcendence on a regular basis, to show us how to think about what we could be. Tonight we have a wonderful moment with Ursula K. Le Guin speaking with Zoe Carpenter. Zoe Carpenter you may not know quite as well, but you will. Zoe writes for us from Washington, D.C., and she has carved out an incredible space in American journalism. She is championing the great radicals of our time, librarians. I know the nuns and the nurses are going to fight him for the title, but I'm going to tell you, I think the librarians have got it, because at the end of the day, the people who are defending our freedom of speech, our freedom of expression, are those librarians. And please join me in welcoming the defender of librarians and the person who's written every book in the library, Zoe Carpenter and Ursula K. Le Guin.
Hi, everyone. Ursula, I wanted to start with something that I think is a strong connecting thread between your work and that of the nation, which is an interest, a curiosity in alternative worlds and alternative political and social systems, things that reasonable people might consider unreasonable. And I'm curious as to why that's an interest you've pursued and what sorts of opportunities are there that might not be in realist fiction per se?
Well, if you make it up, you can kind of open the door to possibilities. Where if you're writing mimetic fiction, realistic fiction, fiction that says this is how it is, you know, in a sense, the doors are all closed. And this is one of the things that I think imaginative fiction has always done. Is sort of throw a door or a window open and say, well, you know, what if we went out there and found out what's happening outside. And, well, I'm thinking of a teenager who caught me at a reading once in San Francisco way back. This would be in the 70s or 80s. 80s probably. And she said, do you know why I love Star Trek? And that would be the old Star Trek. You know? and I said, well, I like Star Trek too, but why do you love Star Trek? And she said, because it shows me a future where I can live. And you know, remember Star Trek was very idealistic and very moral and so on. And here was this 15-year-old. That's what she was getting. That's why she was reading science fiction and watching it.
When you were 15, were there particular doors that you saw as being closed that then maybe later you opened in your writing? Or saw others open?
When I was 15, I think I mostly just saw open doors. Like, hey, I want to go through.
I think one of the things people often associate with an alternative or future world has to do with technological innovation, and we think of technology as being something that's a creative or democratizing force, and perhaps something that could pull us out of our current trajectory towards ecological destruction. But the irony of that is that technology has gotten us into that current trajectory. And you've called it something that's misunderstood and an obsession and a distraction. And so I'm curious as to what you see are the limits or pitfalls of faith in salvation by technology.
Oh boy, that's a big question, Zoe, and very, very complicated. But okay, now in the first place, technology is the clothes we're wearing. It's the theater we're in. Technology is kind of what human beings do with the world. It doesn't just mean high tech. And that seems maybe a quibble, but it's a really big distinction. Technology is just knowing how to light a fire. And we have used technology since we learned how to light fires and knock rocks together, you know. And we've used it in this sort of incredibly increasing rate and velocity and size and so on until we are perhaps, well, maybe we always were a little more controlled by our technology than we realized, but now we are being very much controlled by our technology because it has become so complicated and we are so dependent on it. And we have sort of eliminated alternatives, simpler alternatives, in favor of more complicated ones. So the whole situation is sort of, okay, if technology the technology of the last 200 years or so, and the population growth that goes with it, that it enabled, is what has caused the ecological crisis that we are not on the verge of, that we are beginning to live through. We got to stop pretending that it's going to happen. It's happening. Call it global warming or all those silly names, you know, but anyway. Okay, we have done a lot of damage, and we're beginning to see what the price is. Well, if this was caused largely by our wonderful high technologies and the exploitation of the earth that they require, then are we going to call upon the technology to fix it? Isn't that the definition of insanity? You do something wrong and then you do it over? The techno-fix I'm not saying we have to abandon technology. I mean, forget it. I like clothes too, and I love my furnace and my washing machine, but the techno fix that they keep kind of, we'll handle that. Don't worry about it. This is something we got to think about, right?
And when we think about it and we think about getting out of it, we often hear about progress. What does progress mean to you after having spent so long thinking about the future?
It's not. I never did think much about the future. I'm only interested really in the present and the past. Who knows what the future is? Milan Kundera says, "Who knows? It's not there. We don't know what it is." The future in science fiction is just a metaphor for now, But progress. It isn't thinking about the future that's made me wonder about progress. It's just living 85 years. What does progress mean? The Latin word means going forward, right? Just going forward. Well, that's what you do when you walk. When you live, you just go forward. You can't help it. But progress towards what? And in what direction? I'm beginning, I hate to do it to the nation, but I'm beginning to question the word progress.
Why? Just because it's so ephemeral?
Define it. What do you mean progress? Progress, I think we sort of assume that it means progress towards something better, higher, nobler, more generous, more free. I don't know, but you can progress towards evil just as easy. Mm-hmm. We don't, maybe I'm playing with words here, but I'm a little bit worried about this idea that we have to just, if we have progress, we'll be okay.
So I guess one concrete example might be the emergence of a stronger women's voice in literature and in politics. That's something that you've spoken about before, is the need for a feminine voice in a landscape that's mostly dominated by the masculine. So has there been, if not progress, have there been developments on that front that you find encouraging?
Yeah, there sure have been developments. There's been some progress, yeah. And of course, it's not just the woman's voice that's missing. Women are simply a very large part, probably the largest part, of the voices that have not been heard. And that's, genderly speaking, that's not just women, but all kinds of other genders. And in white America and white Europe, people of other color, that in a sense, it's the unheard voices that, if we're going to get anywhere, we really have to start listening to each other and to the voices that we have not listened to. Because I have to say that the dominant European white imperial voice has got us where we are, and it's not a very good place to be right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ursula Le Guin.
Jordan roll. my soul. Arise in heaven, Lord, for the Edom and Jordan roll. I want to be my Father's children. I want to be in my Father's children. I want to be my Father's children. Roll, Jordan, roll. Oh, say, ain't you done with the trouble on the world? Trouble on the world, I say, ain't you done with the trouble on the world? Roll, Jordan, roll. As I lay down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way, when you shall wear the starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. Oh, mourners, let's go down, let's go down, let's go down. Oh, mourners, let's go down, down in the valley to pray.
Brothers and sisters, Eric Clausel. Exquisite singing of exquisite songs. And there is a nation story behind those songs. Oregon, like my native Wisconsin, was a state that stood on the Union side of the Civil War. And in that Civil War, in 1861, the first section of the Confederacy to be liberated was Port Royal, an island off South Carolina. When Port Royal was liberated, former slaves from the plantations throughout the region fled to that island and formed their own community. They formed a society where they, for the first time in many of their lives, were in charge, where they ran things. They organized that community, but they were impoverished and they were neglected. Very wealthy Philadelphia abolitionist James Miller McKim was aware of this, and he dispatched his 19-year-old daughter, Lucy, to go to Port Royal and to make a report on the conditions of the slaves who had come to live there, literally thousands of people. Lucy McKim came down to the island, and she wrote in 1861, 1862, of her fellow abolitionists, "How lukewarm we have been, how little we knew." She spoke of the ignorance of well-intended liberals who had not begun to do enough to recognize that black lives matter. Lucy McKim's message to her father was that we must support these folks, but we must also begin to recognize their genius. And the songs that she heard at Port Royal formed the basis for a small book that the Nation magazine, which James McKim helped to fund in 1865. He was one of the founding funders of the magazine. In 1867, the Nation published this small book of spirituals and began to expand an understanding of the African American contribution, not merely to our economic life, but to our cultural life. It was the Nation magazine that began to tell that story with that small booklet, what Lucy McKim brought to us. And it was at that point that the Nation magazine began to say, and we have not always said it as loudly as we should, we have not always said it as well as we should, but began to say as we say now, Black Lives Matter. Brothers and sisters, we have on the Nation staff many writers who have explored so many aspects of our cultural experience, our economic experience, and our political experience. But I'll admit, for a while there, we somewhat neglected the sports experience. And so on this night, when we have dragged you away from watching baseball, we decided that we would bring to our gathering the greatest progressive sports writer in America, which is, I acknowledge, perhaps a little bit like the tallest building in Wichita. But I would also suggest to you that with his incredible work as an author, as a radio personality, as a documentary maker, Dave Zirin has marked himself as the most visionary sports writer of our time. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce my friend and comrade, Dave Zirin.
Thank you very much. One more time for John Nichols, doing yeoman's work. He's backstage brushing the pelt of Scott Walker, which he now has on his wall, which he's very happy about. Looks great on you, John. Yes, the Nation does have a sports writer. And I've found that oftentimes when I meet people, the first thing they say is, the Nation has a sports writer? And what you find is you can tell a lot about a person in terms of how they ask that question. Like, I'll never forget meeting the great late Howard Zinn and telling him that I was going to be writing about sports for the Nation. And he got the biggest smile on his face. And he said, the Nation's going to have a sports writer? Just promise you'll go easy on my Red Sox. I said no. And then I was backstage for a execrable television show called Morning Joe, and with a gentleman you may have heard of by the name of William Crystal. The groan speaks for itself, radio listeners. And I introduced myself to William Crystal, and he said, the Nation has a sports writer? That's absurd. And I couldn't help myself. I had to say, is it any more absurd than the fact that people still want to hear what you have to say about anything? We didn't go out for tea later. But it's an honor to be a sports writer for the Nation, because when you go back into the Nation's archives, what you see is that they're actually on the correct side, and I say correct side not as opinion, but as fact, the correct side of the critical sports and politics questions of the last 150 years, when the overwhelming amount of the mainstream sports media was utterly wrong. When the sports media said that you needed to have a white league and a Negro leagues, the Nation championed the cause of integrated baseball. When the overwhelming amount of the sports media said that girls should just shut up and be happy to cheer for the boys, the Nation championed women's sports. When the overwhelming sports media, I mean, it's like almost damning the Nation with faint praise, because typical sports media, I mean, is a rather disgusting group of people, to put it mildly. Hunter S. Thompson called them a group of baboons furiously touching themselves in cages. So it's like, I cleaned it up for the radio audience, but it's, But just the idea that, yes, the nation looks great compared to them. But seriously, it is worth saying that when these baboons said that Muhammad Ali, and they called him Cassius Clay, should no longer box, the nation said Muhammad Ali should not only have his title restored, he should be celebrated for his stance standing up to the war in Vietnam. And that's why it is an honor to write about sports for The Nation magazine. And it's necessary because there is such a tremendous radical sports tradition that I think the left has largely given up. I mean, treating sports the way Dick Cheney would treat a falafel. They just see it as something they want no part of whatsoever, like, ugh, sports. And I went into a left-wing bookstore in a city I don't want to name. It's Philadelphia. And I was going to read from a book I wrote that contains a lot of columns I'd done in The Nation. The book is called What's My Name, Fool? And the cover was a big Muhammad Ali face. Just big Muhammad Ali face is the entire cover. And I walk in and I say, hey, I'm here to do the What's My Name, Fool talk. And they say, who are you? And I said, Dave Zirin. And they said, but you're white. And I said, yeah, last I checked, I don't understand. And they said, but isn't that you on the cover of the book? And I had to explain, like, no, that's Muhammad Ali, not me. And I was looking around this store, and they were selling posters of everybody from Emma Goldman to Malcolm X, and it was stunning to me that they did not know the face of the most famous war resistor in the history of war. So we need to reintegrate that radical sports history into the general consciousness and claim the parts of it that are a tremendous expression of the values that The Nation magazine represents. And with that, thank you. And with that, my very brief reading is just terrific from the Nation archives. It's from one-time Nation editor Carrie McWilliams, who wrote a letter to his own magazine. I'm sure that was tough to get it published, on July 22nd, 1978, and it was called Muhammad Ali for Congress. And he wrote, Ali is more than a celebrity. He is a man of character and charm. His stand on the draft alone stamped him as a person who has the courage of his convictions, put him down as a person of remarkable native gifts, intelligence, perception, and goodwill. A lovely sentiment, sure, but then he got a response in The Nation from a man named Muhammad Ali. And this was Ali's response to Carrie McWilliams. He said, I am extremely flattered by your appraisal of me. You sure done your homework and covered all the bases. It ain't often that I am quoted so accurately. But to get down to the nubbin, I ain't interested in politics. I mean like running for office. I'm a world man. My fellow man is not just an American, and my race is the human race. I'm shook up when I see a child that is going hungry or a mother who is without medical attention. These are the things that I'm interested in, and of course, peace. Peace for all people and all nations at all times. Muhammad Ali. It is a tremendous, I think, condemnation of so many people in this nation, is certainly the sports media, that Muhammad Ali was only truly embraced after he lost the power of speech. But it is a tremendous statement of hope that you have a new generation of people who want to know the real Ali, the anti-war Ali, the anti-racist Ali, the Ali who stands with us today as a symbol of truth, as a symbol of justice, and as a symbol of an alternative to a world in eternal war. And now, I get to introduce one of my literary heroes as your next speaker. I wanted this, so I get to do it. The next speaker, who is coming up to the stage right here, I'll just say I first saw him speak 2 decades ago. I was a teenager, and I snuck in the back of a room and held my breath and raised my hand just to ask this guy a question, because the books that he wrote, the fiction that he wrote, I mean, it spoke to me. I mean, it changed my life, and maybe at certain times it saved my life. I mean, one of the great fiction writers of the last 50 years, the author of more than 45 critically acclaimed books. He wrote characters who became my friends, people with names like Easy Rawlins and Mouse and Fearless Jones and Socrates Fourclaw, and all the remarkable characters in his universe that he created. It's an honor to introduce him. He's not just a fiction writer, though. His nonfiction has appeared in the New York Times and, of course, The Nation itself. He's won a ton of awards, too many to list. That's less important than the people that he's touched in this world. It is my honor to introduce to you all the great Walter Mosely.
Hello. You know, I'm really glad I'm not the last one speaking. You know, because my relationship with the nation is like different than all these other people. I don't want to be different, honestly. But, you know, the reason I even like started working with the nation is because I had this big argument with Katrina, you know, about how I was sitting in a room for fundraising for the Nation, or Nation Institute actually, and there were like no black people there, you know, except famous black people, which doesn't really count, you know. You want black people that you don't know in the room. And you know, and then later on, you know, when first George W. Bush and then Mr. Obama started, you know, bailing out people for trillions of dollars, I went to the board meeting and had this big argument. I thought, well, shouldn't we, instead of giving the money to the banks that stole the money in the first place, shouldn't we give it to, you know, people who made less than $40,000 over the last 3 years and let them bail out the country by spending the money on whatever, you know? And I had an example. I said anything from paying off the car to paying off the kids' loans to going to a prostitute. It didn't matter. As long as you spent the money, it would end up in the bank anyway, and so that would be the better way to do it. And, you know, we've always been arguing. I mean, we always argue. And I don't know. So anyway, I was asked to come here and give a talk or read, you know, an article like everybody's doing, and, you know, and I had an argument, you know, so I wanted to read you what I argued about, like, you know, what my point of view was. And I want you to understand, I don't necessarily think I'm right. It's just I can't help it, you know. And so when I was asked to come here and read an article penned by Martin Luther King Jr., I pushed back. This is natural for a black man of my age and from my background. Black people then and still today push back because our rights, our incomes, our dignity, our very lives are always on the line. Our children attend prison-like schools, our young men make up a great portion of the prison population, and as felons, many of their rights, often including the vote that Dr. King fought so valiantly for, have been stripped from them, from us. So when I was told I had to come all these miles to read from the writings of a black man, I said, why? Are we so racist that we believe that any race beyond humanity really exists? Am I only allowed to speak from your perception of my virtual color? Is the great charismatic leader finally only a nigger, the descendant of slaves? The only valid notion of color for my so-called race is that black on skin is the color of a bruise, a painful subdermal wound that flinches away from the touch. So I didn't want to be too sensitive. So I read the piece by King a few times and saw that even though Dr. King was talking about the Negro race back then, today he's talking about almost all of us. Once the debate entered the economic realm, we were all concerned whether we knew it or not. And today, our pocketbooks are almost all torn. Our souls, as Tennessee Ernie Ford so eloquently said, are owed to the company store. Now, that was my argument, and I still hold to it. But I'm going to read this thing. It's by Martin. It's the Last Steep Ascent, March 5, 1966. I just want to say, I feel this is something I feel bad about because I felt I had to add a word. I'm not going to tell you what word I added, but there's a word in here that wasn't in the article. I felt it was better for me to read it. This took a whole day. It only took me about 4 minutes to write this little piece here, but it took me a whole day to add that one word. which you will never know unless you buy some copy of the magazine from then. That's March 5, 1966. At the end of 1965, the civil rights movement was depicted as bewildered and uncertain, groping desperately for new directions. The substantial legislative accomplishments of the past several years, it was argued, dealt so extensively with civil rights problems that the movement had become stagnated in an embarrassment of riches. Negro leaders, we were told, did not know how to maintain their assembled armies nor what goals they should seek. But the Negro freedom movement has a policy and a program. It is the white power structure that gropes in indecision. White America, caught between the Negro upsurge and its own conscience, evolved a limited policy toward Negro freedom. It could not live with the intolerable brutality and bruising humiliation imposed upon the Negro by the society it cherished as democratic. A wholesome national consensus found expressions in laws, court decisions, and in the alteration of long-entrenched custom. But the prohibition of barbaric behavior, while beneficial to the victim, does not constitute the attainment of equality or freedom. A man may cease beating his wife without thereby creating a wholesome marital relationship. The period which has been completed, though attended by turmoil and spectacular events, was relatively easy to accomplish. For the white majority, there were few hardships, and the lifting of some burden of guilt adequately compensated for any limited inconvenience. The future is more complex. Slums with hundreds of thousands of living units are not eradicated as easily as lunch counters or buses are integrated. Jobs are harder to create than voting rolls. It is easy to conceive of a plan to raise the minimum wage and thus, in a single stroke, extract millions of people from poverty. But between the conception and the realization lies a formidable wall. Someone has been profiting from the low wages of Negroes. Depressed living standards for Negroes are a structural part of the economy. A hardening of opposition to the satisfaction of Negro needs must be anticipated as the movement presses against financial privilege. The danger of this period is not that Negroes will lose their gains. History will not repeat itself in a simple cycle. It can, however, fail to move forward and can become stalled on a higher plateau without prospect of reaching the summit. Our nation is now so rich, so productive, that the continuation of persistent poverty is incendiary because the poor cannot rationalize their deprivation. It is an anachronism in the second half of the 20th century, or for that matter in the 21st century. Only the neglect to plan intelligently and adequately and the unwillingness genuinely to embrace economic justice enable it to persist. Negroes expect their freedom, not as subjects of benevolence, but as Americans who were at Bunker Hill, who toiled to clear the forests, drain the swamps, build the roads, who fought the wars and dreamed the dreams the founders of the nation considered to be an American birthright. Thank you.
Walter Mosely. Walter Mosely. I think Ezekiel Easy Rollins would be quite proud. It is remarkable for a kid from rural Wisconsin, which I am, to stand between Walter Mosely reading from Dr. King, and then to be introducing Naomi Klein. Because it strikes me that nothing speaks so well to the remarkable breadth and character of The Nation magazine than this moment, to be able to connect these very different people who come to this same place. Naomi Klein has been by any measure, a transformational person in our times. And yet she has no desire to be a transformational person. The whole point of Naomi Klein has been to form a transformational moment in which movements arise that take on the crisis that surrounds us. I was in Seattle in 1999 for the protests against the World Trade Organization. A month later, barely a month later, less than that, Naomi Klein's book, No Logo, arrived. And it struck me, how did someone capture everything we were fighting for on the streets and put it in a book a couple weeks later? And the fact of the matter is, it was just the proof that Naomi Klein is a brilliant writer. She is a brilliant thinker, but she is some sort of visionary, some sort of seer who always gets a little ahead of where we need to be and then takes us to that higher ground. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman who taught us about the shock doctrine and disaster capitalism, and the woman who told us that our understanding of the need to fight climate change would lead to a movement that would indeed change everything. Brothers and sisters, Naomi Klein.
What a thrill this night is for me to be sharing this stage with some of my personal heroes, and I am just so starstruck to be following Walter Mosely, reading indeed my favorite Martin Luther King essay that actually is what I end This Changes Everything with, the unfinished business of liberation. And I have the wonderful honor of reading an essay by another one of my personal heroes, Wendell Berry. It's an essay that was published in The Nation on June 4th, 1976, called The Unsettling of America, as you know, one of Wendell's great masterworks, the book by the same title. One possibility is just to tag along with the fantasists in government and industry who would have us believe that we can pursue our ideals of affluence, comfort, mobility, and leisure indefinitely. This curious faith is predicated on the notion that we will soon develop unlimited new sources of energy: domestic oil fields, shale oil, gasified coal, nuclear energy, solar energy, and so on. This is fantastical because the basic cause of the energy crisis is not scarcity. It is moral ignorance and weakness of character. We don't know how to use energy or what to use it for, and we cannot restrain ourselves. Our time is characterized as much by the abuse and waste of human energy as it is by the abuse and waste of fossil fuel energy. Nuclear power is presumably now going to be used benignly by the same mentality that has egregiously devalued and misapplied manpower. If we had an unlimited supply of solar or wind power, we would use that destructively too, for the same reasons. Perhaps these sources of energy are going to be developed. Perhaps all of them can sooner or later be developed without threatening survival, but not all of them together can guarantee survival, and they cannot define what is desirable. We will not find those answers in Washington or in the laboratories of oil companies. In order to find them, we will have to look closer to ourselves. I believe that they are to be found in our history, in its until now subordinate tendency of settlement, of domestic permanence. It is to be found in the ambitions of thousands of immigrants, It is formulated eloquently in some of the letters of Thomas Jefferson. It was the dream of liberated slaves. It was written into law in the Homestead Act of 1862. There are few of us whose families have not at some time been moved to see its vision and to attempt to enact its possibility. I am talking about the idea that as many as possible should share in the ownership of the land and thus be bound to it by economic interest, by the investment of love and work, by family loyalty, by memory and tradition. How much land this should be is a question, and it varies with geography. The Homestead Act said 160 acres. The Freedom Act of the 1860s hoped for 40. We know that, particularly in other countries, families have lived decently on far fewer acres than that. This old ideal is still full of promise. It is potent with healing and with health. It has the power to turn each person away from the big-time promising and planning of the government, to confront in himself, in the immediacy of his own circumstances and whereabouts, the question of what methods and ways are best. It proposes an economy of necessities rather than an economy based upon anxiety, fantasy, luxury, and idle wishing. It proposes the independent, freestanding citizenry that Jefferson thought to be the surest safeguard of democratic liberty. Perhaps most important of all, it proposes an agriculture based upon intensive work, local energies, care, and intentional permanence. That is, to state the matter from a consumer's point of view, a dependable long-term food supply. This is a possibility that is obviously imperiled by antipathy in high places, by adverse fashions and attitudes in the general public, by the deterioration of our present farm communities and traditions, by the flawed education and inexperience of our young people. And yet, it alone can promise us the continuity of attention and devotion without which the human life of the earth is impossible. So, it only took 4 decades for the Pope to catch up. When I first embarked on the journey that led me to write This Changes Everything, I was a little insecure because I came from, as John so generously talked about, from writing about economics and human rights, not ecology, not the environment, and I was a little insecure about it. And for a variety of reasons, and it was just a few months after the BP Gulf oil disaster, one of the very first things I did as part of my research was go on a kind of a pilgrimage to interview Wendell Berry. And that took me to Salina, Kansas, where Wendell happened to be giving a lecture at the Land Institute. Now, the Land Institute is a very special place founded by the amazing Wes Jackson, and it is devoted to the project of transforming our entire approach to agriculture so that it does a much better job of mimicking the way working ecosystems actually function. And Wendell has a long relationship with the Land Institute and a long friendship with Wes. So the Land Institute has this huge and groundbreaking program devoted to breeding perennial staple grains, wheat, barley, sorghum. And the idea is to develop grains that form the basis of our diet, that don't have to be replanted every year, that stay put and go easier on the soil, and in the process lay down deep and sturdy roots. Roots capable of storing water and therefore withstanding drought, which is something very important in a time of climate change. Roots that hold soil in place in the face of storms so that it isn't just coping with the impacts of climate change, but also actively sequestering carbon in the soil, which is part of fighting climate change. Now, one of the things they do at the Land Institute is they dig up these perennial roots so you can see them, because this is all stuff that goes on invisibly underneath the earth. And it's amazing to see these perennial plants, especially compared to those wimpy, wispy root systems that hold up the plants that make up our food system. These perennial roots go deep into the earth 10 feet or more, and they're these intricate webs of strong branches. When you look at them, they look like underground trees. Now, some of you are probably wondering why I'm talking about this. They had one of these dug up roots hanging behind Wendell Berry as he was delivering his lecture. And he was delivering his lecture in a barn, which is one of the things they do at the Land Institute. Now, the lecture that Wendell was delivering, much like the piece I just read, was about the importance of settling down, of putting down roots, and then defending your home place against all those who would do it harm. And this is exactly what Wendell has done as a person, as a farmer in Kentucky, in the way he practices agriculture in a way that protects the natural cycles of fertility rather than just extracting from them and not caring about the results. In his writing, in his literature, he tells the story of the place where he lives in all kinds of ways. And he also practices this rootedness, this fierce defense of home place in taking on the coal barons in Kentucky who blast the tops off of mountains. So I vividly remember watching Wendell up there, this incredibly rooted man standing in front of this intricate, actual root system. And I thought, I cannot write this book. I have never felt like such a fraud. I have never felt so hopelessly rootless and urban. I just felt like this kind of wandering Jew whose ancestors have moved from place to place, fleeing conflict and war, and then later winter, and then just kind of out of habit, right? Thinking about place as a commodity. And you think about, all the lists in which Portland ranks in the top 5 best cities to live in, right? Not where's home? Where's your home place? But then I sort of pushed myself, this feeling of illegitimacy, because I also felt like what I was experiencing was a part of why it has been so difficult for my generation and generations younger than me and a little bit older than me to come to terms with the crisis of climate change and to act on it. Because even though climate change is a global phenomenon, it is happening to the whole planet, it plays out in ways that are intensely local. An early blooming of a particular flower, an unusually thin layer of ice on a lake, the late arrival of a migratory bird. Noticing these kinds of subtle changes requires an intimate connection to a specific ecosystem, and that is the kind of knowledge that Wendell Berry has. You have to have roots in a place to know that it's strange to be able to walk around in a t-shirt in Portland in mid-October, that it didn't used to be like this. That kind of communion happens only when we know a place deeply, not just as scenery, but also as sustenance, and when local knowledge is passed on with a sense of sacred trust from one generation to the next. And of course, this is becoming increasingly rare, and climate change is busily adding to the ranks of the rootless every day as natural disasters and failed crops and starving livestock and climate-fueled civil and ethnic conflicts force more and more people to leave their ancestral homes. And with every human migration, more crucial connections to specific places are lost, leaving yet fewer people to listen closely to the land. So after his lecture, I then had my interview with Wendell and Wes together. And I very sort of tentatively asked Wendell if he had any advice for rootless people like me and my friends who live in our computers and always seem to be shopping for home. What should we do? And he said, stop somewhere and begin the 1,000-year-long process of knowing that place. I said, well, how do you know when to stop? And he said, well, how do you know when you've fallen in love? So that's solid advice on lots of levels. Because in order to win this fight of our lives, we all need a place to stand. The good news is that a lot more people are finding their home place, even if they are relatively new to it. And I feel this particularly strongly here in the Pacific Northwest, or as some of you call it, Cascadia, or as more and more of you call it these days, Blockadia. I don't think there is a part of the world that has clocked more victories against the fossil fuel giants than this part of the world. Just a few months ago, we saw the birth of a new word, kayaktivist. Taking on Shell's Arctic drilling rigs and icebreakers in Portland, Seattle, Bellingham, those unforgettable images of the people hanging off of the bridge, blocking that icebreaker, stalling them. And I think even though they did pass that day, I believe that those actions may have had a little something to do with Shell's decision to pull out of the Arctic for the foreseeable future. And this is not some isolated victory. This region has successfully won victories against proposed tar sands pipelines. You have canceled multiple coal export terminals. You are fighting coal trains and oil trains. Portland is on the verge of definitively blocking a $500 million propane gas terminal that was regarded as a done deal just a few months ago, a deal that is now done. And you have also gotten this city, I understand, to agree to divest from fossil fuels. Well done. But Portland is not satisfied. Now Portland wants to lead the country and the world in declaring itself fossil-free and refusing all future fossil fuel infrastructure in your city. That means no storage, no transport, and no export. That is the way to go. That is the next frontier of Blockadia. These victories have come out of amazing coalitions of people who decided to stop somewhere because they fell in love with the beauty of this place and the principles of love of land that it embodies. And those newcomers have joined with people who have been here for generations, working the land and the seas as farmers and fishing people. And they have joined with the region's original inhabitants, the indigenous people whose roots date back many thousands of years, who have been generous enough to share their stories of the land. And what is so powerful is the way in which people have come together, united not by rage and hatred of the fossil fuel companies, but by this powerful love of place. This movement is about people falling more deeply in love with where they live because it is under threat. But the other part of it that is so exciting is that it isn't just the no, it is also the yes, the visionary yes that is being protected, but also understanding that it isn't enough to say no to what we don't want. We have to provide real economic alternatives. And that is what is so prescient about going back and reading that essay of Wendell's in 1976, in which he states that if renewable energy is developed with the same mentality that produced the fossil fuel economy, it will replicate the same abuses. And that is absolutely true. What he is talking about, what he was talking about, is what today is called a just transition, or the climate justice movement. It is not just about flipping a switch from fossil fuels to clean energy. It is about using this transition away from fossil fuels to heal and repair the wounds that date back to the founding of this country, and that can be part of winning the unfinished business of liberation that Dr. King was writing about in the pages of The Nation. In many parts of the world, this is called energy democracy, which means, we don't want Shell to be the ones providing renewable energy. We want communities to own and control their energy as a commons and as a right, with the resources staying in their communities. And it means we don't just want any old green jobs. We want green jobs that pay a living wage. And it means that when we talk about changing our economy, it isn't just about putting up windmills and solar panels, but it is about defending the low-carbon economy that already exists and that is so systematically devalued, and that is women's work, and that is immigrant work. It is the work of caregiving and defending the land. It is the work of teaching and caring for the young and the old that is so systematically devalued and under attack, but is low carbon, by the way. The kind of land reform and land justice that Wendell referred to, one that sees land as a right and recognizes the broken promises made to freed slaves. And what would this mean? That would mean that the people who are getting the worst deal in the current extractive-based economy would be first in line to benefit from the jobs, the infrastructure, the transit, the energy democracy. Indigenous communities and communities of color need to be first in line to benefit from a justice-based transition. We need to do it fast. You know, some people say to me, and you know, some of you have heard me say this before, you know, Naomi, climate change was big enough. Did you have to make it about capitalism? But here's the thing. This is the only way we win. The fossil fuel companies are fighting for their lives. That's why they fight so hard. We need a movement filled with people who are fighting for their lives too, fighting for a future that is better than their present. That is the way you win. And we don't have a lot of time. We have to leap. Small steps are not enough, and the climate clock is ticking. So I want to end with another quote from Wendell. And it has to do with the notion that before we can be part of a process of social change, we have to be sure that we're going to win. If not, what's the point? Well, Wendell was very scathing about this. He says, we don't have a right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. The only question we have a right to ask is, what's the right thing to do? What does this earth require of us if we want to continue to live on it? I think this is particularly true when it comes to climate work. The decision of whether or not to maintain hope in the face of an existential crisis for humanity should not have anything to do with odds. The stakes are so high that if there is any chance of avoiding catastrophe, we all have a moral responsibility to do our utmost to expand the chances of success. That is what Wendell Berry's work means to me. That's what being part of the Nation family and the Nation tradition means to me. We don't fight because we know we're going to win. We fight because it's right and it's just, and because we know that we cannot afford to lose. Thank you.
Naomi Klein. She is Canadian. Canada has an election coming up. I believe in the power of the write-in vote. And so I know that if it doesn't happen this year, it will in some election soon, when we will welcome Naomi Klein as the Prime Minister of Canada. Or, thank you. Or in some other leadership role, because she has done so much to guide us in so many ways. Ladies and gentlemen, thank Naomi Klein for joining us one more time, because that was such a powerful and important message, one that we have to take with us as we go forward. Naomi Klein joined the Nation magazine's family at the behest, at the invitation of Katrina vanden Heuvel. Katrina is the editor and the publisher of the Nation magazine. That gives her a great deal of power within the institution. Often powerful people are very, very good at saying no. But the remarkable thing about Katrina vanden Heuvel is that she says yes. Almost 20 years ago, when I said that I wanted to go to Seattle to cover what people promised would be this great protest against the WTO, but which none of the other media was covering, Katrina vanden Heuvel said, yes, go to Seattle and go to the streets and tell us the story of a struggle against a broken global trade system. When I said to Katrina vanden Heuvel after the 9/11 attacks, I want to write about the peace movement that will say, do not turn our sorrow into your war. Katrina vanden Heuvel said, yes, go and tell the story of those who want diplomacy and peace over another war. When I said to Katrina vanden Heuvel, I want to go out to Oregon and write a story about a state legislator named Jeff Merkley who's running for the U.S. Senate, Katrina vanden Heuvel said, yes, go and write that story. When I said to her, I want to do an interview with Bernie Sanders because he said he might run for president of the United States, Katrina vanden Heuvel said, yes, go do that story. When I said to Katrina vanden Heuvel, we have to do more coverage of a global movement against austerity and a global movement that says another world is possible and that this is our world, not theirs. Katrina vanden Heuvel said yes. Ladies and gentlemen, the editor and publisher of The Nation magazine, the woman who says yes to another world that is possible, Katrina vanden Heuvel.
Humbled to be here tonight. I am simply the steward of the nation. I'm truly moved by what I've heard from my fellow writers and thinkers. The reason I'm breaking up is it's not easy to be editor of the nation. And I say that I am humbled tonight, but as Naomi said so brilliantly, how do you maintain hope in the face of often insuperable obstacles? How do you, as John said, believe in another world is possible, when, as editor of the nation and publisher, and my colleagues, my brothers and sisters, as John likes to say, we have to live in the world as it is, yet work and imagine the world as it might be. As the great Ursula Le Guin said tonight many times, and what a wonderful evening to talk about utopia as these other events swirl around us. But this is the work of the nation. Someone shouted out there when John went on about Naomi becoming the next prime minister. John, I think, is channeling because he has a career in electoral politics. That Naomi, Naomi has many things to do, but one thing she has to do has been the work of the nation for 150 years, which is not a belief in political parties or policies, but a belief in what can happen when you tell people the truth. A belief in a moral politics that transcends the day-to-day transactional politics, that is about transformational politics, that is about a publication that for 150 years has challenged the idea of what is possible, has redefined the idea of what is viable. And that is the work of the nation. And if I could just speak very briefly to give a few examples of when the nation has spoken out, has challenged what seems the possible, and has challenged what I think of as the downsized politics of excluded alternatives. In 1952, at the height of McCarthyism, a time when fear of the other stalked the land, and think how fear again is used to manipulate our politics. We argued that fear has always been used as a weapon to subdue the hard-fought civil liberties that make America truly strong. We argue the very same thing today, as a resurgent intolerance muffles, stifles, distorts our humanity, and a growing surveillance state tries to take root. But as all of the speakers, all of the great contributors to the nation also speak to, those forces are being challenged. There's always an Edward Snowden for an NSA. Think of Edward Snowden going on Twitter and his first follow was the NSA. Or a year ago, I sat in a hotel room in Moscow with Edward Snowden, and he worried then, a year ago, that his revelations might not have the impact he had hoped for, though he was already being listened to. A year later, he wrote in the New York Times that he sees changes. Changes are coming. There's more resilience. There's less fear. There's more possibility. But the work is unfinished, as Naomi said. In 1956, Ralph Nader, who should not become known as a spoiler, but should become known as the father of the consumer rights movement in this country, published in The Nation, The Safe Car You Can't Buy. That was the genesis of his iconic book, Unsafe at Any Speed, marking 50 years this year. And it was the first stirrings of a consumer movement in this country, which we can see today take shape in Elizabeth Warren's baby, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So that is where change starts. In the 1960s, as Walter explained in his inimitable way, and it is true, Walter, as so many Nation writers and editors often meet in argument and then go on to be comrades. Our civil rights correspondent, he was our civil rights correspondent from 1961 to 1966, Martin Luther King Jr. He summoned this country to confront not only racial injustice, but economic injustice. And his prophetic words help bend the arc of the moral universe a little more toward justice. And today, there are other voices like King's, Reverend William Barber of the Moral Mondays movement. If you don't know it, check it out in North Carolina. It's moving across the South, and as it must move across this country as voting rights are suppressed. Martin Luther King, Reverend Barber, today, racial justice movement with young activists from Black Lives Matter. This is the arc of history that the nation witnesses, pays homage to, and celebrates. The nation argued, and this is resonant in this state, in light of Wayne Morse as your former senator, the nation argued that reaching a negotiated solution in Vietnam was a better strategy than bloody military intervention. That was in 1954, we argued that. Years later, our managing editor, Ernest Gruning, joined Wayne Morse as two lone voices against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. I believe they both lost their re-election, but you often win by losing. And just hours after the horror of 9/11, just a couple miles from the nation's offices in downtown New York, we warned not to give in to fear, not to let 19 men with box cutters provoke our nation into escalating that conflict on their terms. We unwaveringly opposed the Iraq War. We warned it would undermine our security, create chaos in the region, inflame, not end terrorism, and cost millions in lives and treasure. Today, we witness the ravaged region. We argue against the quick reflex of military intervention as a response to barbarity and injustice abroad. We say, and laugh at us, but we believe there is a different kind of realism. We say, give peace a chance. Give peace a chance. It is in the interest of all. And I say, picking up on my great colleague Dave Zirin, I am proud. I think my legacy will be as the first Nation editor to hire a sports writer. The Daily Worker had one. Why can't the Nation have one? I'm going to do TV with Bill Kristol to my right on Sunday. When I turned to Bill Kristol on TV a few months ago and said, how dare you speak about going back into another war? How dare you not be held accountable? What is it with corporate media? They keep putting this guy on. These people should be in the docks. They are discredited. But I'm more polite than Dave Zirin. I said it on air, it's true. I didn't say it in the whatever room. So you saw Richard Kim speak so beautifully, so powerfully about solidarity. I turned to him in 2011, partly because the Nation, in many ways, though we editorialized against the Vietnam War 68 times between 1954 and 1967, we didn't get the moment, the cultural, social moment, movement moment. And I said to Richard, go down to Zuccotti Park. Cover Occupy. Report it. Report the hell out of it. And he did. And we did that coverage because we knew in Zuccotti Park, and not only, I was in Portland around the Occupy time, and there were different Occupies around this country, that it was a movement moment that is now transforming this country. A movement moment that we see in the streets, in the movements the nation covers as journalists but stands with in spirit. And we see it tonight. I haven't seen the debate, I admit, but we see it in the sense that movement, Bernie Sanders, whatever one thinks of him, has pushed ideas once relegated to the margins because the corporate media didn't want to hear them into the mainstream where they should be. You know, how dare a corporate media tell us what is mainstream? What is the center? What is the center should be at the center, what's at the center of millions of people's lives. Like what's happening in your great state. Voting rights, death with dignity. I mean, these are issues, the fight for 15, which is sweeping the country. The nation interns now are part of the $15 minimum wage movement. If we're gonna speak it, we live with it. But I think, I do think that we are at a moment, we have one of the great voting rights correspondents, Ari Berman, but how did voting rights become a partisan issue? This is a pro-democracy issue, and this state has led on that. We must fight back because, as Naomi said and others have said, this is a movement moment. In movement moments, things happen more quickly. Things move that took months, years before to happen, but we are also in the fight of our lives. We have a court which is ready to relegate us back to the Stone Age. We got 158 families contributing half of the money into what is a plutocracy. So we got to fight back with good journalism, investigative journalism, committed journalism. And that is the work of the nation. It is the work of what you are doing in Portland. I loved what Naomi said. I'm just going to say kayaktivist. This is also a David versus Goliath moment because you know what? The emperor has no clothes. And I think we're beginning to see that. We're beginning to see a truly discredited kind of consensus crack up, an establishment which has failed its people. People shouldn't depend on the establishment anyway, but which has failed its people and is scared. So it is an extraordinary moment. The nation is tracking it, covering it, I believe has seeded some of it with its journalism. So the nation stands shoulder to shoulder with movements in these times, with labor, with teachers, with the librarians Zoe covers so brilliantly, prisoners, the poor, migrants, women. We will not allow Planned Parenthood to be defunded. This is an assault on women's bodies. And whenever economic tyrants would subvert and subject a democratic people, we fight. And today, when confronted with a confederacy of the fearful and the angry, talking about the Republican Party, we say that fear and anger never, ever built a great nation, a truly exceptional one, not these bogus exceptionalist claims. That is our fight. I close in some ways echoing, again, Naomi. Norman Thomas, if you don't know him, check him out, as they say. We endorsed him in 1932. I got all these endorsements in my head, I guarantee you. He said, "I am not a champion of lost causes. I am a champion of causes waiting to be won." And that is the business of the nation, and we will make a profit with that business model. Thank you. And John Nichols, everyone come out.
Oh, good. Come on. Katrina Vanden Heuvel. Brothers and sisters, let us. Naomi Klein. Dave Zirin. Walter Mosely. Zoe Carpenter. Ursula K. Le Guin, Richard Kim, brothers and sisters, the Nation Magazine, the Nation family, thank you for being with us tonight. Solidarity!